The agri-world of Aethelgard did not know peace. It knew only the quota. For 10,000 years, its skies had been choked with the smog of processing manufactorums, its soil tilled by billions of serfs who lived and died without ever seeing the sun. Here, life was a currency spent to feed the insatiable hunger of the distant hive worlds. The rain here did not wash away the filth, it only made the grime slicker, coating the Gothic spires in a layer of industrial despair. Planetary Governor Hecate Varus stood upon the balcony of her spire keep. She was a woman of iron will and cybernetic lung implants, listening to the wheezing rhythm of her own breath. Below her, the capital city was a nightmare of gargoyles and smokestacks. She expected the usual reports: grain rot, worker riots, perhaps a minor cult uprising in the lower hab blocks. But the air felt different tonight. It tasted sterile. Suddenly, the Auspex arrays did not scream. Usually, when ships arrive from the warp, reality bleeds. The air tastes of copper and old nightmares. But this was silent. The Master of Vox stammered, his augmentations twitching in confusion. "My lady," he whispered, "no warp translation detected, no Geller field signatures. They just appeared." Above the cloud layer, the gray smog parted. It was not a chaotic hulk of the orcs, nor the jagged, spiked silhouettes of chaos. It was a shape of perfect, terrifying geometry, a dagger of pure white ceramic and durasteel, a mile long, cutting through the pollution, an Imperial Star Destroyer, the Chimera. It hung over the cathedral city like a scalpel over a festering wound. There were no gargoyles on its hull, no prayers inscribed on its armor, just cold industrial efficiency. "Attention, inhabitants of this system. You are now under the protection of the Galactic Empire. Do not resist. We bring security. We bring order. Surrender your planetary governance, and you will be treated fairly." Governor Varus gripped the railing, her knuckles white. She looked at the pristine white ship, then down at her grime-covered hands. She did not understand the word fairly. In the 41st millennium, there is no fairness. There is only the Emperor and the enemy. She spit blood onto the balcony floor. "Get the astropaths," she commanded. "Tell Terra the soulless ones have come." The landing was executed with mathematical precision. 3 Lambda-class shuttles descended through the smog, their wings folding upward in perfect unison. There was no roaring afterburner, only the high-pitched whine of repulsor lifts pushing against the gravity of Aethelgard. As the landing ramps lowered, they did not touch concrete or metal, but sank deep into the thick radioactive mud of the planetary surface. The contrast was blinding. From the pristine, sterile white interior of the shuttles marched the Stormtrooper Corps, their armor gleaming like polished bone against the grime of a dying world. TK-4211, designated Sergeant of Orex Squad, stepped onto the soil and immediately checked his biofilters. The air here was toxic, smelling of burning promethium and rotting meat. Through his T-visor, he scanned the perimeter. What he saw defied Imperial logic. Hovering near the landing zone was not a droid, but a human skull stripped of flesh, fitted with a robotic eye and a sputtering anti-grav engine. It bobbed in the air, chanting a recorded prayer. "Target unidentified," he muttered over the comms. "Biological/mechanical hybrid. It appears to be praying." Then the locals arrived. They did not march in formation. They poured out of the Gothic trenches like a landslide of brown cloth and rusted metal, the planetary defense force of Aethelgard. They wore flak armor that looked like it had been scavenged from corpses, and they carried rifles that were connected to heavy backpacks by thick cables. There was no tactical spacing, no cover fire. They simply stood in the open, hundreds of them, screaming praises to a god emperor with a fanaticism that unsettled even the conditioned minds of the stormtroopers. "Halt!" TK-4211 amplified his voice. "By order of the Galactic Empire, disperse immediately or we will open fire." He never finished the sentence.
A lasbolt, a crackling beam of coherent red light, struck his shoulder pauldron. It didn't penetrate the plastoid armor, but the heat was intense, scorching the white surface black. The engagement began instantly. The stormtroopers dropped to one knee, their E-11 blasters lighting up the gloom with crimson plasma. The Imperial aim was true. The PDF soldiers fell in droves, holes burned clean through their flak jackets. But the PDF did not retreat. In the Empire, when a unit takes 30% casualties, they rout. Here, the enemy climbed over the bodies of their own dead to get a better shot. The air filled with the terrifying snap-crack of lasguns and the hiss of blasters. TK-4211 watched in horror as a PDF officer, waving a chainsword, a literal sword with motorized teeth, charged the Imperial line. The stormtroopers were trained for warfare, for cover and suppressive fire. They were not trained to fight madmen who welcomed death. "Air support! Danger close!" the call went up. From the clouds descended the scream, the twin-ion engine roar that terrified 1,000 systems. 2 TIE fighters strafed the trench line, their green laser cannons pulverizing the rockcrete and flesh alike. The PDF advance finally faltered under the heavy bombardment. As the smoke cleared, the white armor of the stormtroopers was no longer pristine. It was splattered with mud and the blood of zealots. They had taken the landing zone, but for the first time the soldiers of the Empire felt a cold realization. They were not fighting an army, they were fighting a cult on a planetary scale.
Grand Moff Tarkin stood on the command bridge of the Chimera, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose of absolute arrogance. Through the triangular viewports, he observed the surface of Aethelgard. He had seen primitive worlds before, and he had seen industrial worlds, but he had never seen a society so consumed by its own decay. To him, the Imperium was not a rival civilization, it was a resource management error. "Governor," he said coolly to the hologram of the planetary leader, "your resistance is illogical. The Empire offers trade routes, standardized medicine, and order. You offer your people only mud and superstition." The reply from the surface was not a diplomatic counteroffer. It was a scream of religious fury. The view screen flickered, showing the interior of the governor's palace, a room filled not with computers, but with parchment scrolls and servitors. Tarkin watched in visible disgust as a servitor, a lobotomized human combined with machinery, shuffled past the camera. "You speak of logic," Governor Varys spat back, "but you lack the soul. We do not want your trade. We want your blood to sanctify the ground you have defiled." The transmission cut with a burst of static. Tarkin sighed, a sound of disappointment rather than anger. "They are fanatics," he stated, turning to his general. "Reason is wasted on the insane. Deploy the mechanized division. Clear the streets. Do not destroy the manufactorums. We need them intact for the war effort." He viewed this as a police action, a riot to be quelled. He did not understand that he had just declared war on a culture that had been fighting for 10,000 years without pause. On the ground, the rhythmic thudding of heavy metal footsteps echoed through the narrow cathedral-lined streets. The Empire deployed the AT-ST chicken walkers. These bipedal machines were designed for agility and suppression. They stalked through the Gothic fog, their chin-mounted blaster cannons swinging left and right. The Planetary Defense Force, terrified by the height of the machines, opened fire with heavy stubbers, bullets pinging harmlessly off the gray armor. The AT-STs returned fire, their red lasers tearing through the sandbag barricades, turning the defenders into mist. From the bridge, the tactical map turned from red to green. The Imperial advance was swift. The technological gap was simply too wide for the local militia to bridge. "The Capitol Plaza is secured," an officer reported. Tarkin nodded, a thin smile touching his lips. "It appears their faith is no match for our engineering. Prepare the garrison. We will begin re-education of the population by dawn." He believed the battle was over. He believed he had broken their spirit. But deep beneath the governor's spire,
In a chamber shielded by lead and hexagrammic wards, the true weapon of the Imperium was being loaded. It was not a missile. It was a choir. 12 astropaths, blind, emaciated psychics, sat in a circle, their minds linked in a psychic scream. They pushed their souls into the warp, burning out their own brains to send a single desperate message across the stars. As Tarkin watched his victory unfold, he didn't notice the subtle vibration in the air, the way the shadows in the corners of the bridge seemed to lengthen. The message had been sent. The angels of death were coming.
The orbit of Aethelgard was secure. The Imperial Star Destroyer Chimera drifted lazily, its TIE fighters patrolling the vacuum in swarm formations. Commander Krennic stood by the sensor array, satisfied. The surface resistance had been crushed. The data logs showed total pacification. It was, by all accounts, a textbook conquest. But the sensors began to glitch. Not the static of interference, but a deep, throbbing distortion that made the deck plates vibrate. Space did not fold elegantly into hyperspace. It tore open. A wound in reality ripped across the starfield, a bleeding gash of violet and bruised black colors that defied physics. It was the warp. Krennic shielded his eyes, a wave of nausea hitting him instantly. From this tear in the universe, a vessel emerged. It was not aerodynamic. It was not sleek. It was a 5-kilometer-long Gothic cathedral propelled by engines the size of cities. The Eternal Crusader, a battle barge of the Black Templars. Imperial officer, panic. Unidentified vessel. It has no shields we can detect, but its armor plating is meters thick. Hailing them now. The officer paused, sweat beading on his forehead. No response, Commander. They are ignoring us. The massive ship did not slow down. It plowed through the formation of TIE fighters like a shark swimming through krill, its prow armored in adamantium, smashing 2 frigates aside without firing a single shot. On the surface, the Stormtroopers looked up. They expected shuttles. They expected air support. Instead, they saw fire raining from the heavens. Hundreds of black metal teardrops were screaming down through the atmosphere, burning red-hot with re-entry heat. These were not ships. They had no wings, no thrusters for a soft landing. They were drop pods, kinetic missiles filled with the Emperor's wrath. "Incoming bombardment! Take cover!" Sergeant TK-4211 screamed as the first pod slammed into the plaza. Boom! The impact shook the city to its foundations, cracking the rockcrete and sending a shockwave of dust rolling over the white armored troopers. There was no silence after the crash. Explosive bolts detonated instantly, blasting the ramp doors off the pod with a mechanical hiss of steam. From the smoke, they stepped out. 7 feet tall, shoulders as wide as a blast door, armor black as the void, adorned with white crosses and purity seals that fluttered in the wind. The Space Marines. They moved with a speed that should have been impossible for their size. The first stormtrooper raised his blaster, but before his finger could squeeze the trigger, a bolter shell the size of a soda can hit his chest. It didn't burn him. It detonated inside him. The angels of death had arrived, and they did not bring peace. The engagement distance closed to 20 meters. The stormtroopers, disciplined and drilled, unleashed a wall of red plasma fire. The E-11 blaster is a deadly weapon against flesh and cloth. It boils blood instantly. But against the sacred ceramite plating of power armor, it was like throwing candles at a tank. The red bolts splashed against the black armor of the Templars, leaving ugly scorch marks and blistering the paint. But the warriors underneath did not falter. They did not even slow down. Initiate Helbrecht, a neophyte of the Crusade, roared a litany of hate as he sprinted forward. To the stormtroopers, he was a blur of violence. He raised his bolt pistol. The weapon kicked like a mule in his transhuman grip. Thud, thud, thud. Each mass-reactive shell found a target. These were not lasers that cauterized wounds. These were rocket-propelled grenades that penetrated the white plastoid armor and detonated inside the rib cages of the enemy. White armor turned red in an instant.
"They are not stopping. Suppressive fire doesn't work," a stormtrooper captain screamed, his voice cracking with genuine terror. The Empire relies on fear. The sight of a legion of white soldiers usually forces surrender, but you cannot terrify a creature that has had the capacity for fear surgically removed from its brain. The Templars crashed into the Imperial line. It wasn't a fight, it was an industrial accident. A Space Marine backhanded a Stormtrooper. The sound was like a wet branch snapping. The trooper's helmet, his skull, and his spine sending the body flying 10 meters through the air. Chainsaws roared to life, the iconic chainswords of the Astartes. The Stormtroopers' vibroblades were designed to parry lightsabers, but they shattered under the grinding adamantium teeth of the chainswords. The pristine white ranks broke. For the first time in their service, the Stormtroopers routed. "The infantry is ineffective. They are being slaughtered. Deploy the Dark Troopers. Activate Phase 3 units immediately." From the heavy dropships hovering above, black metallic figures dropped with heavy thuds. Dark Troopers, droids, cold, logical machines built for maximum lethality. They stood taller than the Stormtroopers, their red eyes glowing, heavy assault cannons spooling up. The Black Templars stopped. They did not stop out of fear, they stopped out of disgust. In the Imperium, there is no greater heresy than the abominable intelligence, a machine that thinks for itself. The chaplain of the squad pointed his Crozius at the droids, his voice amplifying over the battlefield like thunder. "Behold," he roared, "the soulless sentience. Destroy the abomination. Suffer not the machine to live." The Astartes did not just fight now, they went into a religious frenzy. The ground began to shake, not the chaotic tremor of artillery, but a rhythmic, metallic pounding that registered on seismographs across the continent. The Empire, realizing that their infantry was being butchered, escalated the conflict. From the heavy transport barges, the colossi descended, the AT-AT walkers, towering beasts of gray armor, standing over 20 meters tall. They were designed to terrify rebels, to crush hope under their massive feet. General Veers commanded the lead walker. From his cockpit, the Space Marines looked like small black insects. "Target the largest heat signatures," he ordered calmly. "Maximum firepower." The AT-ATs unleashed their heavy chin-mounted turbo-lasers. Crimson bolts of energy, capable of shattering shield generators, slammed into the Astartes lines. The earth erupted, dust and rock vaporized. Veers smiled. Nothing could survive that bombardment. But as the smoke cleared, a low, mournful war horn sounded. Boom! It was a sound that vibrated in the teeth of every man on the battlefield. The fog parted, and the God Machine stepped forward. It was a warhound scout titan of the Legio Mortis. It did not look like a sterile vehicle. It looked like a hunched predatory wolf made of Gothic cathedrals and weaponized hatred. It was smaller than the AT-AT in height, but it was 3 times as wide and infinitely denser. The AT-ATs fired again. Red lasers struck the Titan, but they did not touch the metal. They splashed against an invisible bubble of energy, the void shields. The air rippled with blue lightning as the energy was harmlessly displaced into the warp. Inside the AT-AT, the Imperial crew was baffled. Imperial pilot. "General, our shots, they are dissolving. Some kind of magnetic field? It's off the charts." Inside the burning fluid of the Titan's amnion tank, the Princeps mind-linked with the machine spirit. He felt the pinpricks of the AT-AT lasers like a fly landing on his skin. "Threat analysis, minimal," the Princeps intoned in binary code. "Engage plasma blast gun. Purge the Xenos tech." The Titan raised its arm. The air screamed as a miniature sun began to form in the barrel of its weapon. The warhound fired. It wasn't a laser bolt. It was a globule of superheated plasma that burned with the heat of a star. It struck the lead AT-AT in the neck. There was no explosion, only melting. The heavy durasteel of the Empire turned to liquid instantly. The massive walker groaned, its head slagged into molten ruin, and toppled forward with a crash that shook the city. The Empire had brought a transport to a tank fight. The Titan stepped over the burning wreckage, its war horn sounding again, challenging the sky.
The Imperial line was breaking. The Titan had slaughtered the walkers, the Astartes had butchered the infantry. To save the campaign, the Empire played its final card. A lone shuttle, black and sleek, descended amidst the carnage. It did not land, it hovered, and a single figure dropped 10 meters to the ground, his cape billowing behind him. Lord Vader had arrived. The temperature on the battlefield seemed to drop. The terror he projected was not psychic, it was primal. Even the Astartes' senses registered a sudden, unnatural chill. Vader ignited his blade. Snap, hiss. The crimson bar of plasma hummed with a sound unlike any power sword. A Space Marine captain charged him, swinging a power axe capable of cleaving a tank. Vader didn't block, he simply stepped aside and slashed. The lightsaber, powered by kyber crystals, cut through the ceramite armor, the black carapace, and the flesh beneath with zero resistance. The captain fell, bisected. The Sith Lord walked forward, deflecting bolter rounds with negligent flicks of his wrist, killing a transhuman warrior at every step. But then, the air crackled with the smell of ozone and brimstone. Stepping out from the Astartes ranks was a figure in blue armor, wearing a hood wired with glowing psychic conduits, a librarian, a warrior mage of the Imperium. He did not carry a gun, he carried a force staff that crackled with blue lightning. He looked at Vader not with fear, but with a hunter's focus. "I sense the warp within you, Shadow Walker," the librarian intoned, "but your power is thin, sterile." Vader raised his hand. The Force reached out to crush the librarian's windpipe. But the librarian's psychic hood flared with blinding light. The telekinetic grip shattered against the mental fortress of the Astartes. The librarian retaliated. "Witness your doom." He unleashed Smite. A bolt of bio-lightning drawn from the dimension of hell itself arced towards Vader. Vader raised his lightsaber to absorb it, but the force of the impact drove the cyborg lord to his knees. This was not Sith lightning. This was raw, chaotic energy. Vader, internal monologue. He felt it. When he touched the mind of this warrior, he didn't feel the dark side. He felt screaming, billions of souls burning in a sea of fire. He felt entities in the void that were laughing at him. The duel was a blur of red and blue. The lightsaber clashed with the Force staff. Vader was faster, his duel skills honed against Jedi masters, but the librarian was a weapon of mass destruction. Every time blades crossed, psychic shockwaves shattered the windows of nearby buildings. Vader realized he could not win a contest of power against a man channeling a dimension of pure madness. He reverted to the physical. He threw his lightsaber. The spinning blade bypassed the librarian's psychic shield and severed his arm. As the librarian screamed, Vader gripped him with the Force, not choking him, but snapping his neck instantly. The librarian fell. Vader stood victorious, his breathing heavy, his armor smoking from the psychic lightning. He had won, but for the first time, the Dark Lord felt something he hadn't felt since Mustafar. True pain. The war on the ground was a stalemate, but the war in the void was about to begin. Admiral Piet watched his sensor screens with growing confidence. The Executor, the Super Star Destroyer, had arrived. 19 kilometers of dagger-shaped terror. It eclipsed the sun, casting a shadow over the entire northern hemisphere of Athelgard. Against this Leviathan, the Imperial Star Destroyers looked like toys. Piet believed he was invincible. He was wrong. From the dark side of the moon, the Imperial Navy responded.
The Divine Right, a Retribution-class battleship, burned its plasma engines to life. It was not sleek. It was an 8-kilometer-long flying cathedral covered in gargoyles, statues of saints, and gun batteries the size of city blocks. It did not glide. It plowed through the vacuum, its mass so great it possessed its own gravity well. The Executor was a weapon of war. The Divine Right was a temple of hate. Concentrate all forward firepower on that vessel. Thousands of heavy turbolasers lit up the dark. Green beams of coherent energy lashed out, striking the Divine Right, but they did not hit the hull. They splashed against the void shields, barriers of energy drawn from the warp itself. The green fire rippled and vanished into another dimension. The Divine Right did not even shake. Inside the Divine Right, the scene was a nightmare out of the Dark Ages. There were no autoloaders. 20,000 indentured slaves chanting hymns of penance pulled massive chains to load the macro cannons. Shells the size of skyscrapers were hoisted into the breaches. Gunnery Master, load the munitions. For the Emperor, fire! The broadside erupted. It wasn't a laser show. It was a kinetic apocalypse. Thousands of tons of high-explosive ordnance flew across the void. The macro shells slammed into the Executor. The Empire's particle shields were designed to deflect energy, not solid matter of this magnitude. The impacts were catastrophic. The sleek hull of the Super Star Destroyer buckled. Explosions rippled along its starboard side, venting atmosphere and stormtroopers into space. But the Imperium was not done. The captain authorized the Nova Cannon. The prow of the Divine Right opened like a flower of death. The Nova Cannon fired a projectile accelerated to near light speed. It struck the Empire's shields with the force of a collapsing star. The bridge crew of the Empire was thrown from their stations. The lights died. And then came the worst sound of all, the metallic thud of boarding torpedoes slamming into the hull. The Space Marines were not just shooting at the ship, they were coming inside.
The void parted. A moon-sized sphere of gray durasteel emerged from hyperspace. The Death Star. It was the ultimate expression of the Tarkin doctrine, rule by fear. Grand Moff Tarkin looked at the tactical display. The battle was messy, the losses were unacceptable. He decided to end the game. "You may fire when ready," he commanded. The station began to rotate, its super laser focusing lens glowing with emerald energy. On the bridge of the Imperial Navy battleship Divine Right, the Lord Admiral watched the moon station charge its weapon. A tech priest Logis stepped forward, his mechadendrites twitching. Tech priest, analysis, enemy construct is a planet killer, charge cycle, 3 minutes, probability of survival, 0. The Admiral did not blink. He did not order an evacuation. In the Imperium, retreat is a sin punishable by death. He ordered the only thing that made sense to a servant of the God Emperor. "If we cannot hold this world, then the enemy shall not possess it. They seek to destroy it? No, we shall purify it. Authorize exterminatus." It was the ultimate act of spite. The Imperium would not let the Empire blow up their planet. They would do it themselves, to deny the enemy the satisfaction of the kill. From the belly of the Divine Right, a single torpedo dropped. It was not a laser. It was a cyclonic torpedo. It bypassed the atmosphere and burrowed deep into the planet's crust. Death Star gunner, "Sir, energy spike from the surface. They fired at their own planet." Tarkin paused. "What?" The cyclonic torpedo detonated. It ignited the planet's atmosphere. In seconds, the oceans boiled into steam. The continents cracked.
Guard, home to 4 billion faithful citizens, turned into a ball of fire. The Death Star crew watched in stunned silence. They were soldiers who followed orders. They were witnessing a cult that committed suicide on a planetary scale just to prove a point. But the horror was just beginning. The sudden, violent death of 4 billion souls created a psychic scream that tore the fabric of reality. A warp rift opened, not in space, but inside the Death Star. On the sterile white corridors of the station, the air turned cold. Blood began to drip from the ventilation shafts. The ghosts of the dead, fueled by the warp, began to manifest. The Stormtroopers were no longer fighting soldiers, they were fighting nightmares.
The Galactic Empire retreated. They did not run out of ships, they ran out of sanity. The Death Star, its corridors echoing with the whispers of the warp, initiated an emergency hyperspace jump, tearing itself away from the cursed system. Admiral Piet ordered the fleet to fall back. They had come to bring order to a chaotic region, but they had found a madness that defied their physics. They left behind thousands of dead stormtroopers, shattered TIE fighters, and the burning debris of a world that no longer existed. Where the planet Guard once stood, there was now only an asteroid field of cooling magma. The Imperial Navy of the 41st millennium did not mourn. The divine right simply turned its prow toward the next war zone. There were no speeches for the fallen. There was no reflection on the loss of life. In the Imperium, a planet is just ammunition. If burning it denies the enemy a foothold, then it is a price paid in full. So, who truly won? In a vacuum, the Galactic Empire possesses superior logistics. Their hyperdrive is faster. Their manufacturing is standardized. If this were a war of attrition over 1,000 years, the Empire's ability to print soldiers and ships might eventually overwhelm the Imperium's crumbling technology. But war is not fought in a vacuum. It is fought in the mud and in the mind. The Empire relies on the Tarkin doctrine, the belief that fear of force will keep the local systems in line. But you cannot threaten a population that already worships a corpse god on a golden throne. You cannot terrorize a citizen who wakes up every day expecting to be eaten by demons. The Empire's greatest weapon is fear. The Imperium is immune to fear because they have already lived through the apocalypse. And then there is the warp. The Empire is a sterile society, devoid of spiritual protection. We saw what happened on the Death Star. A Sith Lord like Vader, fueled by hate and pain, would be a beacon for the Chaos Gods. It would not take long before the red lightsabers turned into blades of corn, or the Emperor Palpatine fell to the schemes of Tzeentch. The Empire is not built to fight gods. The Galactic Empire wanted to rule the galaxy. The Imperium of Man merely wants to survive it. As the white ships of the Empire fade back into their own reality, they take with them a terrifying lesson. In a galaxy far, far away, there is hope, but in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.